and welcome to another edition of our treatment of the International Sunday School lesson. Today's lesson is entitled Faithful God, Unfaithful People. And it's for Fall 2017, lesson number 10, and that's for November the 5th, 2017. And the lesson is taken from Numbers, the 25th chapter, 10th through the 13th verse, and 1 Samuel, 2nd chapter, 30 through 36. And we jump around a good bit today with about 300 years between the first event that we're talking about and the second event that we're talking about. Okay? Little background information of these two events. We could alternatively, use a different title for the lesson this week by calling it The Story of the Two Phinehas's. And that's basically where this is wrapped around. There are two people named Phinehas in the Bible. The first one we're going to be talking about is the grandson of the original high priest in the children of Israel. And the second Phinehas is the son of Eli. And the first Phinehas is a very righteous young man and does exactly what he is supposed to do. And the second Phinehas is described as being a despicable young man, him and his brother, and they do what they're not supposed to do. They basically they take and misuse the offerings that people are going in and making offerings to God, and they misuse those offerings out of their greed. And there are serious consequences to those actions. Okay? Now, let's talk about the first Phinehas. Now, the first Phinehas, the story takes up when the children of Israel had a serious lapse of morality, and they had brought a Midianite into the congregation, and which was completely against what God had told them to do. And this was not because of racial reasons, but because of the idolatry that was going on. And these people would bring in idolatry and sin. And you can see when people will get saved, they'll get inside church, and before you know it, they'll be running around with their old friends and hanging around in places they should not be hanging around in. And before you know it, they will be backslid. And now, let me be real clear about this. If you're in a marriage, do not leave that marriage. I'm not recommending or advocating this, leaving a marriage at all if you're a Christian. But if you're a young person and you are a saved Christian young person, do not get married to someone who is not a Christian. Do not get married to someone who worships a different God than you worship. If they are not going to get saved and come inside the church, do not marry that individual, because the Bible tells you don't do it. That is, if you have not married to the person yet, to avoid that, because it will only cause you problems. Now, if they they genuinely get saved and everything, that's all fine and great. Then go ahead and marry them, but don't marry them under the assumption that you're going to go in there and change them. There have been a lot of folks have married someone who is not a Christian and lived a dog's life because they went into the marriage thinking that they were going to convert that person and just end up with all kinds of problems throughout their entire life, thinking that they're going to convert this person, and it does not happen. Now, this is pretty much what was going on here with the first Phinehas and the children of Israel. In Numbers 25 and 10, and the Lord said to Moses. So we see here where this is a communication coming from the Lord God to Moses. Okay, the 11th verse. Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, son of Aaron the priest. See there, he is the grandson of the original high priest. Has turned back my wrath from the people of Israel, in that he was jealous with my jealousy among them, so that I did not consume the people of Israel in my jealousy. Now, if you look back in the prior verses to this, you will see where Phinehas has, he ran them through with a sword, basically, to stop the abomination that was going on. And the Lord had put a judgment on the children of Israel. There'd been like 25,000 people had already fell dead, and the fact that Phinehas had went and separated and took the iniquity and put the iniquity out of the camp, that he had stopped that judgment from continuing. And that's what God was telling Moses in this verse. Okay, the 12th verse. Therefore say, behold, I give to him my covenant of peace. And see, that is one of the most beautiful ways of describing the relationship with God, this covenant of peace. And I know that probably the vast majority of us, I can say for myself, when I went to the altar and got saved, when I went to the altar, that there was one of the most peaceful things, feelings that I had when I come back and got up from that altar. That covenant of peace. Okay. A 13th verse. And it shall be to him and to his descendants after him the covenant of a perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the people of Israel. So we see here how God is talking how that Phinehas is going to have priesthood forever. He had been set apart, and it was going to be carried on throughout his generations. How that he would have a perpetual priesthood because of his actions. See, there's always consequences for our actions, and there were consequences for the right actions of Phinehas. Okay? Now, let's talk about the other Phinehas. Now, Eli the priest had let his sons get out of control. His two sons, Phinehas and Hophni, they had began to just do any old way they wanted to, and Eli would not deal with his sons, and he let them get out of control. And he had complained to them about the wrong that they were doing, the sin that they were doing. And basically, the sin that they were doing, without going into a lot of the mechanics of it, one of the sins that they were doing is taking the offerings and misusing the offerings out of greed and out of want. And they would misuse those offerings. And it is the most dangerous thing in the world for inside of a church when the people in charge of the church begin to misuse offerings and begin to act like rich people and want to live high on, as we say down south, high on the hog off of the church, and live way far above the people who are giving offerings and everything. That is a very dangerous thing, and it's a sign of apostasy in a church when that happens. Basically, the way it's supposed to work now, a lot of churches, they have to have full-time ministers, and they have to be paid. But basically, the way that works is that if you've got a full-time minister, he should live at about the same level as the people inside that church. In other words, he shouldn't be the poorest person in that church. He should not be the richest person in that church. He should be at he should have about the average standard of living of the people inside that church. And when you see situations where you have full-time ministers who they make 10 times more or 5 times more or even 3 times more than the most of the people inside their church, you've got a problem, because if these people are putting money in the offering plate, those people that are putting that money in that offering plate, they should be living at about the same level as the person who is drawing a salary from that offering plate. Now, that's just the way that is. I don't know what else to say. That's just the way it should be. That is one of the reasons why, and the Jewish people, they did a phenomenal way of setting up their synagogues. They required 10 families before they would have a synagogue. And those 10 the reason why they did is that you had 10 families, they each gave a tithe, then that would leave enough for the rabbi, and he would live about the same level as those 10. His family would live at about the same level as those other people. You figure, they had expenses for their meeting place. That would take care of maybe one of those tithes, and the other 9 tithes would go to keep the rabbi and his family up, and he'd be living off of 9/10 of the money of the stuff coming in, and everybody else would be living off of 9/10 of what they're making, and basically that averages out that everybody is making about the same thing. That's the way that's supposed to work. But Eli's sons, Phinehas and Hophni, they had been dipping in and getting things in a unrighteous, lucrative way, and that had been causing a problem. So God had sent this unnamed prophet to talk to Eli. And that's what the text we've got in this second section of our Sunday school lesson is with this unnamed prophet is talking to Eli. 1 Samuel 2:30 through 34. Therefore the Lord, the God of Israel, declares, I promised that your house and the house of your fathers should go in and out before me forever. But now the Lord declares, far be it from me, for those who honor me I will honor, and those who despise me shall be lightly esteemed. Behold, the days are coming when I will cut off your strength and the strength of your father's house, so that there will not be an old man in your house. Then in distress you will look with envious eye on all the prosperity that shall be bestowed on Israel, and there shall not be an old man in your house forever. The only one of you whom I shall not cut off from my altar shall be spared to weep his eyes out, to grieve his heart. And all the descendants of your house shall die by the sword of men. And this that shall come upon your 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, shall be the sign to you. Both of them shall die on the same day. Now, these words most certainly came true. In the battle, we know that Hophni and Phinehas were killed that same day. There was another child born, and he was named Ichabod. The glory has departed. And we see how that the grief and how that the distress was seen by these people of the high priest. Now, it took several generations for this to be fully worked through and worked out. And we know that the descendants of Eli had actually been involved in being the priest on up through the time of Solomon, but his last descendant that participated in the priesthood had made the serious mistake of siding with Adonijah, who was Solomon's brother, and ended up being exiled from the priesthood, and he was the last one to be a priest in the house of Israel. Was the high priest who had sided with Adonijah, and I believe his name was Abiathar, that had sided with Solomon's brother Adonijah. And when Solomon got control of everything, that was one of the things he said. He said, "You're not going to be a high priest anymore, nor your descendants." And that ended that. Then it took several generations for this fully to come to pass. But as with everything, when God says it's going to happen a certain way, it most certainly will happen that way. Okay, 35 and 36. And I will raise up for myself a faithful priest, who shall do according to what is in my heart and my mind. And I will build him a sure house, and he shall go in and out before my anointed forever. And everyone who is left in your house shall come to implore him for a piece of silver or a loaf of bread, and shall say, please put me in one of the priest's places, that I may eat a morsel of bread. And we know that this most certainly happened. The descendants of Eli ended up basically having to beg for what little they could get. And it is ironic that it happened this way, that was the sin of Eli's sons, was wanting to misuse and grab goods and wealth and comfort from the offerings. And it ended up being that when it ended up throughout their generations, they had lived in poverty because they had sought ill-gotten gain at that point. Okay? Now, this is just a couple of concluding remarks that I want to make. And that is, especially those of us that are in the ministry, in any form of ministry, it is especially important that we are as diligent of giving honor and glory to God and being faithful in seeking God's purposes in our ministry, and not being selfish or misuse anything of God as we go through the ministry, because we see the consequences of that happening, and we're no better than the descendants of Aaron, the high priest. We're no better than them if we are unfaithful in our calling and misuse things during the execution of our calling. They are going to be serious consequences. And if we are faithful in our calling, they're going to be great blessings upon our life. Well, friends, you tune in next weekend for our lesson next weekend.